Hello and welcome to another of my series in Conversation With. And today I have an author called Paddy Rafter who has just released a new book earlier this month called The 48 Acts, and it's something that I found very interesting and I hope you will too. He's had quite an interesting life with a very varied career, lots of different things he's been involved with. But anyway, I shall shut up for a minute and let you listen to him in his own words tell you about himself and what he's been doing. Okay, thank you very much for coming on, Paddy.
Thank you very much, Luke. Delighted to be here. And my name is Paddy Rafter. I wrote a book called The 48 Acts, and the associated websites and all that that can be found under paddyrafter.com. Basically, I am an opera singer who was a lecturer in physics and maths in college, a farmer, a racehorse trainer, a husband, father, and many, many other things. These are all the things I did. And the reason for writing the 48 Acts is primarily to do with my experiences of trauma in childhood and trauma in adulthood, mine, and my long abiding addiction to alcohol over two separate periods of time in my life. And the 48 Acts is basically how I discovered, having been in mental hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, treatment centers, counselors, 12-step programs, you name it, addiction counseling. I've been to every psychiatrist, psychologist you can possibly imagine. And for me, it didn't work, Luke. It worked, but it didn't get to the root of the problem. It was symptomatic treatment. And I found, through my own struggles, terrible pain and trauma, I found a new way to live. And my sole purpose of writing the 48 Acts is so that I can help other people to live their lives in a better way, whether you're dealing with addiction, trauma, anxiety, depression, coercive control, if you're in a coercive controlling relationship. If you find your life is meaningless and there's such a meaningless crisis in the world. And I discovered this by putting this together over a very long period of time.
And how long did it take you to write that, would you guess?
My goodness, about a lifetime and 7 years.
Right, okay. It's very interesting because I can actually relate to a lot of your experience and what you mentioned. Obviously a different life, but you mentioned there's things about trauma as a child. I had a very traumatic childhood, and then I actually married an addict, an alcoholic.
Yeah.
When we met, it wasn't like that, but over time, with various difficulties, there were tremendous problems there. And there's been a few alcoholics and also drug addicts in my own life.
Yes.
I've had my own struggles, with, I suppose you could call it self-medicating, although
Yes.
I was never actually addicted to psychedelics or anything like that. I did indulge, and probably cigarettes for me were the most powerful addiction that I ever suffered from. I had such difficulty giving it up, but then I've ended up using creativity as a sort of way, as a release for my trauma, if you like, and then later on I ended up working in an addiction center for 2 years. And as you mentioned, it works for some people, and others, I remember seeing that they just didn't work at all. And a certain type of person who maybe is sort of perhaps compliant,
Yes.
someone who's a very independent thinker, quite often things like AA doesn't really work for them.
No.
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 So can you tell me a bit about your own attitude towards trauma, and obviously you've mentioned your artistic endeavors. So has that been a big part of your dealing with trauma?
Yes, I'm. So I was. Trauma is. It says it in one of the acts here in the book. Trauma is your perception of circumstances. When I discovered that, that was a game changer for me. So trauma is not necessarily what actually happened, because you'll often hear, "Oh well, there were two brothers in a certain house, let's say," and sure, it didn't bother whatever happened, whatever it is. It didn't affect one of them at all, and the other is it affected them greatly. So you can see it's not the trauma per se, but how you perceive it. Your perception and your perception of the world, your perception of yourself, your perception, your understanding of yourself, and this can be skewed. This will go. If you're, I heard you mention the word there, self-medication. I would posit the idea that most people who are in active addiction are really self-medicating. They're taking themselves from reality, which they can't handle for one reason or another, to a place of unreality, a place where you'll hear the expressions and similar expressions. It takes you out of your mind. It takes you, you forget where you are. It's all about forgetting. It's all about not dealing with reality and being in a fantasy world, creating a fantasy. The problem is that this creation over time becomes a fantasy nightmare.
Mm.
And you still can't get out of it.
You end up with possibly two nightmares. You've the nightmare of the reality you've tried to leave, plus
Yeah,
the new
the
reality
reality
you created.
you've now created.
Mm.
So you've created and you become somebody that you are not. You are not you're never your authentic self. You become a slave to addiction, to behaving in a certain way. And you will do anything. When you're in active addiction, you will do anything to satisfy your craving. Your craving overrides everything, because this is your medication to take you outside of yourself to a safe space. The problem is, as it goes along, the safe space becomes ever more ephemeral and harder to find and much more difficult. And the consequences of your addiction become so much more profound. So I often define addiction as a short-term relief from a long-term pain, despite the consequences.
Yeah, that's a very apt description, and yeah, I think it starts out easy enough, doesn't it? Like
Yeah,
you get a release, and you think, oh God, I feel so much better, and then
yeah,
obviously with the passage of time, your brain adjusts, the dopamine hit you get that
yes,
releases you from all this anxiety and pain and trauma, that gets smaller and smaller, and you need more and more extreme solutions to get that same dopamine hit. And
yes.
you end up in terrible trouble, and you end up robbing your granny or something like that to,
You will
pay.
sell your soul for your addiction,
Yeah.
for your craving, and you then learn. It confirms in you the self-hate, the shame, and the guilt that you already feel. It compounds it. It makes it 10 times worse.
Mm.
So there's very rarely a good outcome from this.
Mm.
You know, it's a very, very serious, fatal
Yeah.
problem.
So
And
you overcame this yourself, obviously,
yes,
and then you've written your book because obviously there are methods that are employed with, with variable
yes,
success. I mean, I've heard the figures, about AA in particular, that people that succeed tend to succeed long term, but the failure rate is absolutely huge.
You wouldn't believe the failure rate if I told you, like it's horrendous.
Yeah.
The statistics for people in general dealing with bad addiction can be as high as 95% failure rate.
Yeah, that's pretty appalling, isn't it?
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's
And
a lack of understanding, Luke.
yeah.
You have to understand that when you deal with the symptoms and a symptomatic treatment and living from day to day, and yes, we deal with all that and why that is trying to get into the present, but the constant identification with being an addict, being an alcoholic, being addicted to social media, being addicted to food, being addicted to pornography, whatever it is you're addicted to, the constant identification only enforces this. What we have to do, what I have found we have to do, is to go underneath all this and discover why we are like this in the first place.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if you think about it, I suppose an analogy for me would be like a gaping sore, and you just put new band-aids over it. You're
Yes.
not actually fixing the gaping sore that's underneath. You're
No.
kind of masking it, and you're maybe relieving the pain of it, but you're not getting rid of the root cause. And
Yes, it's
you
a
know
topological
that's
it's a topological treatment for a deep-seated trauma.
mm. Well, I suppose some methods like psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, etc., attempt to do that, but again, results seem to be very mixed. Again, with that.
Yes. I think what sets I mean, I'm only talking about this because I suffered so much in my life and I had so many opportunities and I have lived a blessed life in ways and I've had very many good things. I also missed out on very many things because of my addictions.
Mm.
And the only reason I talk about the 48 Acts, the only reason I wrote them, and the only reason I put them down is because knowing what I know over a long period of time, I know that it kind of, in a sense, brings all of these factors. You spoke about psychoanalysis, you spoke about a lot of different things. It puts everything in a new perspective. And every single person who has interacted with this book or the program of the 48 Acts, irrespective of what they felt at the start, has found it immeasurably better subsequently.
Well, I think looking through it, I must admit I haven't read the entire book, but I've read sections of it. It seems like a more holistic approach
Yes.
because we live in a very compartmentalized and sort of divided way of looking at the world in our current time frame. Science is separate from the arts, and the arts is separate from spirituality, and human beings are complex, but we don't actually we aren't divided into different sections. We're one whole person, and I think that approach, a holistic approach to your entire life, is far more likely to succeed than just poking at little sections here and there with an attempt to core cure this sort of trauma that's underlying sort of addiction. I mean, from what I've seen, there was an interesting guy called Gatsad did some research on children who in Romania who've been put into these terrible orphanages, and many of them had never been even touched as babies until they were 2, 3, 4 years old. They'd never even been picked up hardly, and they were all traumatized. And the chances of you being an addict when you've been through this awful trauma are multiplied tenfold, really. And that's
Yes.
probably the most likely reaction, is that you're going to become an addict of some kind. Or, I mean,
Yes.
do other people do sort of transmute that into sort of hyper creativity, etc., or become like world changing scientists and somehow find a way past it. But the majority, it seems, they're going to go down that route of becoming an addict when they've been heavily traumatized.
Yes, and even the people who would be who make life-changing changes for society at large often do so at enormous expenses to themselves anyway.
Mm,
Many of them are still deeply addicted in one way or another.
yeah. I suppose
Do you
there's
know?
good examples of like that. For instance, uh, Gandhi apparently was a terrible parent to his children, and I think Albert Einstein was a pretty terrible husband, from what I've read. So
Yeah,
that's
that's
just two
true.
examples off the top of my head of
Yeah,
people.
there are thousands and millions because it's our human nature.
Mm,
And like don't forget, trauma it comes from the Greek word for wound, and if you're deeply wounded by your perception of what happened to you, so we must understand what happened, or the series of events and how your life was, or when it occurred to you. It doesn't have to be in childhood. Whenever these things happen, it's also then how you perceive it, plus how you perceive yourself.
mm,
All of these things together. Now, it can become a noxious mix and become very toxic. It becomes toxic, and the only way we know how to deal with it is to, as you said at the start, to self-medicate. And this self-medication, it's like a slippery slope. It starts here and you feel great, but as it goes, you try and keep feeling the same way, and it takes far more stuff to keep the same way until eventually they're so divergent that you can't,
yeah.
or it costs so much, and you will do anything. You said you will rob your granny. Of course you will. You'll do whatever you have to. It becomes the most important thing in your life.
Mm,
It's survival.
yeah. Now, one thing that struck me is this particular country we're in, Ireland, has a very, very severe problem with addiction. And it's only a tiny country. We haven't even hit 6 million yet. I mean, that's still 2 million less than the population at its peak just before the famine. And
Hmm.
I've wondered about why is addiction so bad in this country? Because it is shocking, and the facilities here are just a bit of a joke, really, in terms of dealing with it. But I wondered if there's some kind of ancestral element in that, in things being
Definitely.
trauma being passed down through generations, either a genetic inheritance or through people mistreating their own offspring as a result of their own trauma, and then it gets passed to the next generation and then the
I think
next.
it's like a family tree of trauma.
Mm,
And like Carl Jung speaks about this quite a lot. Um, it's in our almost in our collective subconscious. I think myself um, that a lot of our current problems stem back to two separate things in our old past, plus something that happened recently. It stems back to the famine and our guilt for surviving the famine when everybody else around us either died or emigrated. Plus our years of experience of oppression. Then we had what we saw in the church, and the losing of all of our what we conceived of as our values, or the people we held most high. So a lot of things have been taken from us. This is There's no doubt that in Ireland there's a huge, but it's everywhere. Look, Ireland is a good example, but it's equally so in America. It's equally so in Southern America. It's anywhere where there has been ruthless oppression, you will find subsequent uh, ruthless, terrible addiction.
What strikes me as interesting is the functionality of Ireland. If you go to places like San Francisco or
Hmm.
Philadelphia, you literally see
These
entire
people,
streets full of people on fentanyl and rubbish
yes,
piled up and people pushing shopping trolleys dressed in rags. Well, from what I can see, there's an unbelievable level of addiction in this country, but somehow people manage to be functional in a way that you don't see in America. Like, I know
absolutely.
for a fact that there, every single village, every town, you can get drugs, you can get all
Of course you
kinds of
can.
stuff.
Yeah,
You know, I was talking to somebody about, they were looking out of the window into the park, and there's some fella there standing next to a tree with a plastic bag full of gear. And he, of course, he rang the Gardaí, but as usual, they showed up like 3 days later to go and arrest this person. Um,
hmm,
and long gone by then, of course. But it's sort of hidden in Irish society. People don't talk about it openly very much, but it's forever there. There's the alcohol, there's, and that so brings me on to what I was going to mention about, addiction to internet, addiction to
yes,
gambling, to pornography. Uh, people don't talk about the trade in prostitution as well. All these
yes,
things are kind of buried, and I suppose in the aftermath of what was a very Catholic society, which sort of suppressed some of those, so it suppressed some of those addictions. As a sort of the church was almost like a substitute, I suppose, for the addiction.
yeah,
You get a bit
very
of
much so.
that's been kind of ripped away because of all the clerical abuse to a large extent, I think. But so
Yes.
now leaves us with this sort of underbelly of addiction, but people don't really discuss it, and so much of it seems hidden. There's people you meet in the supermarket or in the post office or wherever, or down the pub, or even in mass, and some of them are like horrendous addicts, and no one even knows about it. It's all buried.
I think Ireland in that respect is a little bit odd in that it's part of our culture, um, though that is changing slightly. It is part of our culture that everything we need to do, whether we're in the GAA and we celebrate a match, or we celebrate the loss of a match, or it's a communion, or it's a birthday, or it's a wedding, funeral, whatever, they're all associated with alcohol. But with the internet and in the current environment, you now have, as you said, the additional problems of social media. You have gambling, which is a huge problem.
Mm.
You have pornography, which is a huge problem. You have isolation that, though we have never been as connected in social media, we've never been as lonely. The problem of loneliness is unbelievable. Every day I hear it. Every day I see it. And it's becoming more and more acceptable to be on your own. People who work from home, they don't have the office, so they're working from home. They're becoming more and more isolated. This isolation is seen to us as the way we are, as exclusion. When we as humans, like we have been for millions of years, when we feel excluded from our clan, this is another reason in adulthood to turn to something to supplement it, to medicate it, to help it. And often this is a self-medicating substance, be it whatever ones of them. Also, the sugar
Oh yeah,
epidemic,
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
epidemic. And young people especially, all these images, and they see these images on social media of girls looking impossibly like this, young men looking impossibly like this, and they're trying to match up to this. And yet, on the other hand, they're being sold all this sugar. Do you see what I mean? So
Yeah,
it's an impossible situation.
yeah.
At the most vulnerable, when you're trying to form your own personality, these counter indications are coming in and telling you you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you'll never be like this, you'll never be like that. So people, more and more people are resorting to the hopelessness. I
Yeah.
speak, I
And I
speak
mean, that's terrible.
every, I speak every so often, Luke, to people who are young people. What I mean by that is people 18s, in late teens, early 20s, in various form. And the single biggest thing that comes across to me is their sense of isolation and their sense of the meaninglessness of life.
That's very sad.
Now, how have we gotten to a situation where you said about the 48 acts, it's holistic. It is holistic because we are holistic individuals living in what is trying to be imposed upon us an increasingly compartmentalized world.
Mm.
And we're not mixing. We need to mix. We need to see somebody face to face. We need to feel things. We need to be with them. But we're
Absolutely.
becoming more and more isolated at a younger and younger age.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's acceptable.
there's a parallel with that. If you take group animals, because we are group animals, and you
Yes.
put them in a cage on their own, they deteriorate massively.
Yes.
And it's very unnatural what I suppose is really being imposed by, I suppose,
By large
corporations, government, etc.
corporations.
So trying to change the way that we
And
live as
this is what
humans.
they're doing, Luke. And it's going unless we, the people, stand, and we must start making these are our lives. These are our children.
Mm.
Unless we start making some sort of a statement and say enough is enough. For example, I was doing a talk with somebody in a state in the US the other day, and there's a new supermarket which has opened in the US,
Mm.
which has no shop at all. You go online and you order everything online. Now, I know you can order everything online in the supermarket, but if I want, I can go down to the supermarket down the road.
Mm-hmm.
But with this one, it has no physical presence. So when you order something, then obviously you get your delivery. Eventually, it's going to be the case that you won't even be able to go to a supermarket to get your shopping. You won't be able to go to a department store to get your clothes. You won't be able to go to a shoe shop to get your shoes.
Yeah,
These are all nails in the coffin of our joined, shared humanity.
I absolutely agree. And I think you can blame society, but I think you can also blame us as individuals. Because I'll give you
Yes.
a perfect example, right? I try to live healthily. I went to Dingle not long ago. I had to give a talk. I went and bought myself a sandwich with mostly salad in it, and I sat down. I drank some water with it, and next door to me there was a woman with her two sons who looked similar age, and she was just drinking a coffee and staring at her phone. She didn't have any food. The two lads, right, they each had a couple of sausages, they had energy drinks, and they had this toxic ultra processed crisps. And
Yeah,
that passed for their lunch. And I
I
thought,
know.
what is there's not actually any real food there at all?
Yep.
Nothing. Even the
It's empty
sausages,
calories.
like mostly sawdust and crap, really,
Yeah.
isn't it? So uh, what hope do they have if they're being taught or conditioned from infancy that to eat rubbish and think that's normal and eat loads of sugar and
Sugar.
it's up to us not to let them be 2-year-olds on a mobile phone or a tablet and to actually educate them actually what your body needs is real food, especially when you're growing up. That's when you need the real proper good food. When you're my age or your age, we can get away with eating rubbish. We've already grown up. Our body's already stopped
Mm.
growing. We're actually, the other end of things. Uh, but we're actually putting it into their heads that this kind of thing, which is toxic living, is actually normal. And, you know,
Yeah, of course it is. But you're also doing something else, Luke. You're beginning in them a physical addiction to sugar by introducing them to so much sugar and processed foods.
Mm.
ultra processed foods.
Yeah. It's
We're not. We don't deal with that.
Well, I think people have an awareness that it's not that great, but convenience. I think people feel so time poor and stressed that they know it's bad, and then they feel guilty for giving their children crap and letting them go on the say surf the internet for 4 hours because they're too busy doing something else, and they know they're bad parents. But really, the answer to that is not to hit the bottle and feel sorry about doing it, and so you just get drunk to console yourself for being a poor parent. The real answer is actually to try, if you can't fix yourself, at least try not to pass this toxic behavior on to the next generation.
I agree with you, but I think most people, Luke, are basically very decent. They're basically loving, kind, generous by nature. They do these things primarily because they feel that this is the right thing to do. They feel also, yes, there is a convenience element in it, but it's also the world of huge anxiety.
Yeah.
I happened to listen. I was working, bringing horses to stud farms twice during the week. So I'd often have the radio on. And one particular program was a big, well-known main program on the main program in Ireland. And the lady in question had on this person who basically said that it was chronically dangerous to bring children out into fields from now until November because they might get a tick which may cause them to develop some one or two terrible diseases. So the only way you could ever go out in the field is if you wore tights with two sets of pantses tied together and wearing boots. Now,
Oh,
if you that's what this is over the national air
oh
and
my
the
gosh,
national airwaves.
it's insane.
So people are so this. Oh, I'm a bad mother. I'm a bad father if I allow my children out. Imagine something happens. So now they don't allow them out. Oh well, they could get this terrible disease, but the chances are millions to one that you
Yeah,
will be all right.
you're probably more likely to be, you know, hit by a
Hit by
bus.
You're more likely to be hit by a meteorite.
Really, yeah, God, yeah. Well, I've had a tick before, and I actually do know how to deal with them. And
Yeah,
someone
but
told me about how you check for what was it, is it Vile's
Viles
disease?
disease. Viles
Yeah.
disease. There's
Um,
Viles disease, and um, there's a couple of them,
yeah,
but like they're not. There's no balance.
yeah,
You have to take the balance of living life holistically. Yes, I know it may be that one child in a million will get sick. That you can deal with it.
yeah.
When you
Especially if
look
you
at the
do it
whole
quickly. That's the thing they
But look at
say.
the whole population that
uh,
nobody will go out in nature anymore because they're all afraid of some terrible disease that's waiting out there.
Yeah, that's horrific. And I'd say anxiety. You're right. You're saying
Anxiety.
they're creating this anxiety deliberately.
They're
Uh,
doing it deliberately.
I mean, I had tremendous freedom going up. I was basically said, be home 6 o'clock for your dinner, and
Mm,
they didn't know where I'd gone. I'd say I'm off to see my pal Watson's, whoever.
yeah.
I used to get up to all kinds of shenanigans, really crazy stuff. They would have been very horrified if they'd, going down into the quarry at a sand pit, and
Yeah.
we to set
We
up
all did it.
dens in the woods, and I remember even once me and my friends tried to blow up a gas substation. It failed, thank goodness. Otherwise, if we'd succeeded, we'd have all been incinerated. But you know, we
Yeah. But
we just made like a wick out of old bits of paper and stuff, and hid behind a little mound, and it was really stupid, really. But the
like
point
you were
is, we
mixing
didn't
you were
actually
mixing
die. No, none of my friends got killed at the age
yeah.
of like 7 or 8 or 10 or whatever.
And I happened to be somewhere yesterday, Luke, where I was visiting a young couple who had a 6 week old baby,
Mm,
and I was going to hold the baby. And before they would allow me to hold the baby, I had to take off my shoes and go over to the bathroom and wash my hands before I was allowed to pick up the baby.
yeah,
Okay, because of their fear that I might have some contaminant, antibiotic, and pathogens or whatever on me, right? It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, the science has actually proven that exposure to
Is
moderate dirt is actually hugely beneficial. So,
I
uh,
brought
you know,
my four children up on a farm, and as soon as they could walk, they were out in the farmyard.
that's great.
As soon as they could walk, or even when they couldn't walk, I would often be, my wife was teaching and I would be training racehorses in the arena, and I would have one in the pram. I could have one maybe walking around. I could have one somewhere else. Thank God, every one of those children, they never had any serious illness in their entire lives.
Mm. Well, that's another thing. Exposure to animals
Yes,
is actually generally beneficial to your immune system. And
of course it
from what
is.
I see, the domestos kid, as it's called, who's has the mother or father running around constantly with a cleaning cloth and full of domestos and wiping every surface. These children are constantly ill. They're ill all of the time.
Oh, well, why
Their
wouldn't
immune
they?
system is so compromised. And the
Yes,
stress,
exactly.
it's not just that, it's all the stress of having to be aware of this paranoia that's in the
But then
family. Oh,
it's the parents as well. They're so anxious. They're so worried that they're going to be blamed, that they're not doing the right thing by their child, that there's something, that they're going to miss a germ somewhere.
okay, so obviously it's a very different experience for people growing up now. We're even beginning to see the beginnings of fentanyl, which is so cheap that kids on pocket money could afford to buy it. And that's obviously a massive problem in places like America already. But I've heard rumblings that it's actually coming in here now.
Yes, it is, unfortunately. It's one of a large number of cheaply manufactured drugs that are readily available. Most of the people I would know would say that it's easier now to get drugs than get a pint down the town, you know,
Mm,
in the village. In any rural area, fentanyl, as we know, is catastrophic.
yeah.
But it's no more catastrophic than any of these others. It just has its own characteristics.
Mm,
But all of these drugs are catastrophic.
yeah.
They're all. Why are they being made? Why are they? What is happening to our society that this is occurring again and again and again? We have licensed drugs, unlicensed drugs, prescription drugs. They're all drugs. We have drugs like sugar. We have the drug of manipulation through anxiety and fear.
Mm,
Unless we understand all of the stuff behind it, Luke, you said it yourself. The idea that it's holistic. That because of our very nature, the nature of us as humans, as clan animals, we belong and operate and function primarily in a clan, groups of clans. We've been like that for millions of years.
mm,
From Australopithecine to Homo erectus, all back through our lineage of millions of years, back to when we shared a common ancestor with apes and chimpanzees, and even before. We have this incredible need to belong to a group. Now they are structuring drugs and social media, which is a drug. It's
yeah.
just
It's
not a
designed that
physical
way.
drug.
Yeah.
To twist this to make you feel you're belonging, but it's a false belonging.
Mm,
You're getting the same dopamine. If somebody says to you on social media, whatever platform you're on, oh, I like this, or you did this, this is great, you feel a sense of a hit, you get a like, you like this. Then equally, if somebody says you're a most dreadful person, you've done this, that, and the other, because it's becoming more and more toxic, it still has the same effect on you as if you were in a group in a room and somebody said these things to you. It's devastating.
mm,
But the consequences to the sayer, to the person who's saying these things, is not there. So
yeah.
there's not the societal controls built over millions of years to keep a control on this. Now it's exponentially blowing out of the water.
Yeah, there's no accountability, as you say. So, I mean, in reality, if we're sat around the campfire, say, like 1,000
Yes,
plus years ago, and I start insulting you and come over and poke you in the eye, uh, I will have to account for that to you and everyone else that's there. But
exactly.
now,
Not only
if
just to me, but you will have to account for the whole group.
yeah, in the virtual world, the worst thing really that happens to you is you get kicked off a forum or of a group and, maybe get blocked. But that's not really any great damage to you.
It's
You're
not a
not going to be
consequence.
humiliated or you're not going to suffer for, but the person who's the victim of this attack, the younger you are, the worse it seems to be. People my age and
Yes,
older. I grew up with that phrase, sticks and stones will break my bones, but
exactly.
never hurt me. I'm quite resilient and I can sort of just be a bit like a duck, and just, the water off a duck's back and all that. But sometimes things do hurt, but I think the younger you are, the more vulnerable you are to
Because you're
this,
unformed.
yeah.
You're
So,
unformed.
y-
And you're living in a world that's now manipulating you and forming you.
yeah, you even get suicides of young people who've been
Oh,
bullied
it's
online on
dreadful.
Facebook or Instagram or something. And it seems unthinkable to someone like me that I would want to kill myself because someone said I was a horrible person on Facebook. Uh, but I'm not looking at it from the same perspective because obviously I'm not much older, and my world doesn't revolve around social media. So I'm insulated from that sort of effect to some extent.
But you see, that's exactly that's what I mean. So you or I, we're older and we have formed in a different way. Whereas young people are integrated into their society, their group and their clan now primarily through social media.
Mm.
And this is so catastrophic. And the consequences of to the person who is doing these things deliberately, and are the corporations who are manipulating. If it's the corporations who are manipulating, there are no consequences, just gain, financial gain. If it's an individual, they more than likely have loads of accounts anyway, so it makes no difference.
Mm.
Literally, it makes no difference. There are no consequences. And in a world where there are no consequences and no responsibilities to your actions, mayhem exists,
Mm.
as you can see.
Yeah. Well, it's all really worrying, and what occurs to me is there's a perception that there's problems, and everyone acknowledges that there's problems. Even the governments will say, "Oh, yes, there's a problem," but actual solutions. I mean, where are we with that? I mean, I look at the pathetic amount of facilities. I know someone who's a good friend of a relative of mine who's gone off to a centre in this country, um, run by the nuns, or actually, it's quite a big one, and so this person will spend a bit of time there, and is lucky enough to be able to stay there quite long term, and then will go into maybe
A
shelter
halfway house.
accommodation, and then hopefully
Yeah.
resume some kind of normal life. But for every person that gets into a centre to get help, there's literally hundreds of people who are turned away. And where is the help? Where you can go to your family, and often they don't know how to deal with these problems.
You must, yeah, but
They're
also
clueless.
one of the consequences, as you probably know, of active addiction is we hurt those most close to us,
Mm,
and we damage them, and we spread our hurt and our pain all around us. So by the time we're ready for our second or third induction, if you like, or rehab, there's nobody there. There's nobody to support us because we've burned all our bridges. We've damaged and people don't know what we're suffering, that we are not the people that we portray ourselves to be in active addiction. We would never do these things were we well.
mm, that's
Now,
true.
the idea of part of the things I really hope and pray someday is to be able to have a residence, some place, some building of our own that we can start this program of the 48 Acts and work with people on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
And to be able to deal with it, because you said, what's this? It's a solution for a societal solution. The 48 Acts is also designed towards society. How can we change society? What does society need to do to deal with this exponential problem? Why are they occurring in the first place? Why are all these different problems seemingly every day something more? Is it becoming a more and more frightening, anxious, dangerous world? Why is this happening, and how can we deal with it?
Mm.
And it gives a very clear path as to how this can be. So that's why I set up Project 48, which is part of the 48 Acts, which deals specifically with that whole area.
Well, that's
And
a
then,
very positive idea. The trouble I find is I don't really like to get involved in politics, but as a general thing, regardless of political party, whoever's in or not in, you seem to have this underlying problem of ineffectiveness, of just, you know,
make it
uh,
go away.
yeah, just if I ignore this problem long enough, maybe it'll just disappear off its own accord, and I'll just make some like surface level sort of token gestures here and there, and maybe by the time I'll have retired and got my pension, and I won't have to deal with this rubbish anymore. And it seemed a sort of really, really reluctance to grasp the nettle in our political environment. And I think people would love to have leaders that would actually engage with the public and try and actually solve societal problems and
Yeah.
deal with like the rising murder rates, etc., addiction, all these other problems which are
All the problems.
deep
It's
seated.
settled problems. Yes, totally. And this is why I'm really trying to promote the 48 Acts, because it works on two separate levels. On the microcosmic, the individual, on the macrocosmic, societal level at large. And the Project 48, the idea, again in the website, that we try and we have to do some, like, there's no point in we sit down and complain about things and we can see we have to take the responsibility and actually try and do something.
Yeah, I think we do.
First of all,
Sorry, go on.
sorry, but just to say this, first of all, by trying to get ourselves well, taking responsibility for our own lives, then trying to change society by the structures we put in, not by castigating people who are outside.
Yes, well, I think that's really a fundamental step. I agree with that, but I think there's a problem. There's an inherent level of corruption because you look at, say, like our national broadcaster, RTE. I mean, they have advertisers, and you know full well that they're going to get exposure. So it's sort of like money pay to play kind of level with RTE, and I think the whole country is like that to some extent, in that commercial interests are so strong that trying to overcome a lot of our problems means actually having to deal with that sort of endemic corruption. Because people like the status quo. They don't. People who are doing very well out of Ireland Inc. as it is, they don't want any changes. They're very happy with the current situation as they get their nice brown envelope or a box of cash on the side or whatever, and then they get the golden handshake at the end of it. Thank you very much, and they're very happy. So I kind of wonder how do we go about dealing with that in order to put in, like, this, for instance, at your project, which I think could be enormously beneficial. How do we get past all this corruption to the point that we can actually implement real solutions rather than everything just gets kicked down the road? The can gets kicked and kicked and kicked and kicked over and over.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of counter countermanding things going on at the same time. I've worked and had dealings with the people in RT. Most of the people in RT on the ground are very nice, decent people who are very, very helpful. The same with any other institution; it's full of good people.
Yeah, I found that too, as individuals within RT have been really wonderful.
They're fantastic. The problem is our culture, the culture of the institutions, the culture of our country, the culture of what we find acceptable. Now, you said, how can we make change? We can't make change by wishing it so, but by action.
Mm.
We can change by, as I said, this Project 48, for example, is a good example where like minded individuals or unlike minded individuals can gather together, identify, we know some of the problems, highlight these problems, and try and effect real change. Not just talk about them, but we know the damage of sugar. We know the damage of alcohol. We know the damage of drugs. We know the chronic problems of children of 8 and 9 wandering around with smartphones like it's lunacy. We
Mm. I
know all
agree.
these. It's insane. So we deal with them one at a time. We try and lobby. We try and work within what we have, not what we would wish it to be. Most people are fundamentally decent. Yes, there's always corruption everywhere. The problem is that the control is in the hands of fewer and fewer, wealthier and wealthier people at the very, very top.
Yeah.
And this is where it's reminiscent of ancient Rome, or it's certainly in the case of America, or reminiscent of almost a hierarchical feudal structure.
Yeah,
A few
absolutely.
little people at the top have all. And what happened in the French Revolution? Eventually, it comes to a point, Luke, and people say enough. Now, what they got in the French Revolution was just kind of, in a sense, more of the same.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it was a failure, really, wasn't it? And
the
you
failure,
got the Bourbon monarchy back, and then another lot of monarchs, and then you've
and you had
look at
Napoleon
modern
in
France
between.
now. You've still a bunch of
Yeah, no.
autocrats running the shop. You know.
So for our society to change, to deal with our chronic problems of climate change, where it's now become an ideological issue as opposed to a fact,
Mm.
it's the fact that our climate is changing. Whether you deal, whatever the issues, whether you deal with the fact, how do we deal with the fact of our constant wars, constant um, destruction of the lives of so many innocent people?
Mm.
We have to stand up. But we have to. It's not no point in just wandering around with placards because nobody will take any notice of it. We have to do something. We have to create institutions that will not institutions, but movements that will change the nature of our society
Yeah,
from the ground up.
I totally agree. And like for a while, you look at the beginning of this century, look, there's been a gradual pointing out of problems. People always did this, but very much so, pardon me, people getting more to the root of what's wrong. So we've done all this analysis and navel gazing, so we know what's wrong with the world. We've done that to death at this point for over the last 20 odd years. So now, I mean, I'm no longer interested in looking at what the problems are, because we all know what the bloody problems are, and what we need is the solutions. We need to find creative ways of fixing all this, because we're long past the stage of what's wrong. I think we're now at how do we stop this? How do we correct it? We need to find creative ways of dealing with these perpetual failures when people have tried before, like you said, the French Revolution. All that ended up with was a bloodbath, various different sets of new people killing off the other ones by the guillotine, and then the monarchy comes back, and that actual real problem wasn't ever really solved. It was just that you keep on getting these circles, and I personally believe that violence actually just begets more violence, and
Yes,
you're just in a constant cycle that never ends if you go down that road. I think we've got to be a lot more creative. Um, and I agree about what you said about the grassroots. So I suppose self-help and this, to me, there's a spiritual dimension to this, and a
of
lot
course
more
there is.
perhaps of not a gnosis or self-awareness. Would you agree with that yourself, or what
Yes.
would your
So
perspective?
the idea, lots of so we confuse hugely what is meant by the idea of um, self-help, which is everywhere, the idea of gnosis or knowledge. The Greek word, it comes from knowledge or hidden knowledge, self-awareness and self-understanding. We have very little because we are not taught how to do that, how to become that. We're taught to become automatons or automatons. We're taught to be functionaries, cogs in a wheel.
Mm,
This has run its course with the advent of AI, with the advent of the new post-truth, where, like, no matter what I see on the news or on social media, the first thing I have to do is say, well, I wonder, is that the truth? I wonder, if what is it AI generated? I wonder, is this, that, the other? So I have no idea what I'm seeing. So I live in a world where I have no idea what I see or hear is truth or not.
mm,
200 years ago, if you're wandering around a field and you see a bull, you know the bull is there, and you know danger, ever-present danger is always there. Now you can't tell truth from fiction. You can't tell reality from unreality. The first thing we need to do is give people a way to differentiate the truth, how to tell truth from reality. Now, people, you will say, right, well, people don't like truth. Yes, that's true. People prefer the what's familiar,
comfortable lies.
comfortable lives. The familiarity, give me the devil you know sooner than the devil you don't, all this kind of stuff. But the reality is, in our evolution, as we are now where we are, we have to survive as a species. We have one fundamental thing to do now that we never had to do before: identify reality from unreality. Now, this is where it ties into addiction. We spent most of our lives in addiction medicating ourselves away from the awfulness of our reality because we couldn't face it, into a fantasy unreality. Now the world is, in a sense, in an imposed version of this addiction away from reality, where people will stand up and, well, you know perfectly well that that's not the truth, but they'll say it and people are believing it. But
Yeah.
there's a part of them, Luke, that knows that this is not really the truth, or this is not right.
I
And what we
suppose
have
that's
to
the
do,
spiritual aspect coming into it, intuition and sort of a connection
intuition,
with spirit or
connection with
God
the
or whatever.
energy, connection with the energy that's all around it. You said God. The biggest danger with the word God, with God, is the word God.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
Misused, so abused, so used by men for their own devices.
yeah,
Problem with God is the word God. We don't. The only thing you can say with definitiveness, if you like, about God is that you can't say anything, but you can infer.
yeah,
Saint Augustine said, "The only thing I can say definitively about God is I can't. It's all unknowing." Now you could say, yes, in Jesus Christ, um, you had God made manifest and all that. And the problem is, you can see how they've manipulated Jesus Christ into the white Jesus, the money Jesus, the Chinese Jesus, the this Jesus, the that Jesus. And it's manipulation, it's ideologies of Jesus, but it's not the truth. They've taken it and they've made it and they've twisted it.
yeah. And then not everyone is going to agree with the idea that
None.
the
Not at
Godhead
all.
or spirit or whatever can manifest in a
But you
human form
can
anyway.
feel.
So
But
you
as I say in the
immediately
book,
divide
yeah,
people there on that point straight away, you know?
but you can in the 48 acts, as I say consistently, because I'm always aware of the food fights and the cynicism of people who are in the depths of addiction,
Mm.
sadness, depression, and anxiety. Is if you can't countenance the idea of God, you can still feel, you can act as if, you can feel, and you can interact with the power that is all around us, that
Mm.
suffuses us. Like there is an energy. We are all fundamentally energy. Every single thing in my hand, me,
Yeah.
it's all energy.
Yeah, in a certain respect, the physical universe is an illusion, really. We're all full of
Yeah.
space, massive gaps between everything.
Yes, we're
Depth
all
of
energy.
space, a
We
lot,
are
most of
so
everything.
like that's why when we walk into somewhere, we can feel a negative energy.
Mm.
Or we can change our energy. We can change our feelings by changing our thoughts.
Yeah.
We can change our energies from negative to positive.
Well, most people need to learn how to do this. Most people are
How
so
to do it?
unaware. They're not
Yeah.
actually fully conscious, I would say, in a way, and that
Most people
they're
are
being
not.
kind of swept along on a wave, if you like.
They're swept on the wave, but the 48 Acts, the book, part of the idea of writing it is so that you become aware and you have the tools to learn how to do it, to have understanding, knowledge leading you to an understanding, which leads you to an awareness. This awareness will connect you with the energy that's all around you. So it's spirituality in a real sense.
Yeah. Well, we've
Connect.
had enough of fake spirituality because, I mean,
It's so
if you look at what's happened, if you think about the decline of the church, a lot of that's been replaced with sort of supermarket
jumbo
spirituality.
jumbo.
Yeah, and New Age, sort of very, very commercial, very expensive
Yeah,
rubbish, a lot of it. And of
it's
course, there
rubbish.
are genuine people too. There's genuine uh, sort of interest, and a diversity is a good thing. That if you want to be a Buddhist or whatever, then you
Yeah,
should be
but
free to
Buddhism,
do that without being horribly judged, like you would have been, say, if you had said that in 1980 in Ireland, you'd have been laughed at by most people. Um,
true.
but I think it is good that we're no longer restricted to like two different choices of Protestant or Catholic, but at the same time, there's a level of cynicism, a level of exploitation, and an also misdirection and sort of falsehood in a lot of what's now available.
You see, but it is
Unfortunately,
also a huge opportunity, Luke,
yeah.
because I really fundamentally believe that most people who were involved in religion were involved in clan, the
Mm,
Protestant clan, the Catholic clan, us, them.
yeah.
Kill them, kill us, because that goes back millions of years. But they never stood back and actually thought about what the idea was. Because if you thought about it, the first thing you would say is, well, actually, I can't kill anybody because that's fundamentally against my religion.
Mm,
To judge anybody, to hurt anybody. Judge not that thou shalt not be judged.
yeah.
Do this to the least of these, and you do it to me. So we've only used them as figureheads, as excuses. So this is a real opportunity for us as a people and for the world to really look and examine at what's really going on. Because we're forced by circumstances, by where we are in the world, to stop and say, okay, it is as it is. We have got to really get to grips with this, because if we don't, we won't. We won't be here.
No, I agree. Somebody once said to me a long time ago that the reason humanity has survived was because of cooperation instead of competition. But we moved away from that. And now we've reached a point where the competition has got so vicious and so toxic that we've no choice but to, as you say, we've got to go back to the
Back.
cooperation that made us a success. Otherwise, we will annihilate our own selves.
That's true, and you can see that everywhere. And it's a relatively modern phenomenon, probably brought in at the time of the Industrial Revolution, where we've changed cooperation to real competition, horrible competition, manipulation, and redistribution of wealth. Once again, from the poor and the middle class to the extremely wealthy.
Yeah, I mean that was sort of corrected a bit for a while, and
But
now
now
we're
it's
going
come
back
back
to
again.
feudalism. We're going. This is
We're
feudalism
we're
2.0. We're heading right into, and we're already in it. Some people would say
we're
already.
in the same boat all over again,
Yeah.
literally. But the difference is, if we use the tools that they are using on us and use them wisely and well, we can, given where we are now, change our society fundamentally. And just like we changed, like 50,000 years ago, when, as I like to call it, there was a great leap forward, or there was a leap in the advancement of humanity. Now we need a new leap, a quantum leap, a spiritual leap,
Mm.
where we embrace all of ourselves in all of the world. If we don't do that, we are destined to cease to exist.
Yeah, well, I totally agree, and I am hopeful. I think we still have time left. We're running out of time gradually, but I think we've time enough that we can still pull this off. That I'm hopeful that we can save ourselves and create a new future for humanity that will be a benefit to everyone instead of just to a tiny minority. But anyway, we're coming to the end, so I wondered if you had any, if you want to show the book one more time, and if you had any last thoughts
But
on
the book
on
is called The 48 Acts.
and
It's
what's your
available.
website address?
It's paddyrafter.com.
Great. So if you want to, before we wrap up, have you got any last thoughts about what
I
you,
think
basically your core message you want to communicate to people out there about life, the universe, and everything, if you like?
life life is for living. This book, it gives you an opportunity, a way to live your life in a better, deeper way, despite any or whatever has occurred, however many problems you have had or do experience or are having now, that you can start, you will learn not to forget the past, but to understand that the past is the past, and that you will learn to live today, not tomorrow, not yesterday. Yes, obviously we need to plan for the future. We need to be able to work towards a future, but you will learn to live today, and nobody or nothing can hurt you or harm you again.
Well, that sounds very positive. So anyway, I'm going to put the link to your website below, where people can get your book. And well, I know it's only just come out this month, but I'd like to wish you the best of luck with that, and I hope it's a great success. And yeah, I think there's obviously huge potential for us as people collectively with tremendous opportunity, but we also have a lot of obstacles still to overcome. But hopefully, people like yourself will help us make this transition into a better future for the not just in this country but all over the world.
It's
I
all
think
over the
there is
world.
gradual movements, eh, as you say, grassroots movements being established to try and actually change this paradigm
Yes,
completely.
exactly.
So I think it's a very exciting time and a great time to actually be part of that as a positive attempt to change this dynamic we've had to live with for so long. So, best of luck with the book, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much, Luke. It's been wonderful to be talking to you.
Thanks a million. Bye bye.